Welcome to Mac Talk, a Middle Tennessee podcast from Mott Haven Arts and Cultural Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I'm your announcer, Kennedy Galpin. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Nosy College of Art and Design. Located in Nashville, Nosy is the perfect place for creative people.
Thank you, Kennedy, and welcome everyone to Mac Talk. I'm your host, John Pitcher. We like to think of the Mac as a cultural town square where we encourage everyone to be their creative best. So, Kennedy, what sort of creative things have you been doing this week?
So this past week, I was at the beach with some friends, and I didn't really go in the water much, so I spent most of my day at the beach kind of just drawing and trying to get some sketches in. Yep. What
were the themes? Did you have beach themes?
Nope.
You weren't drawing dolphins?
Nope. I was just drawing whatever I usually draw. Okay. On a comic book characters.
If you're in Florida, like manatees, you just
No, it's not my vibe. It just never has been.
So you're doing your usual stuff. What were you doing?
I drew some Superman characters because the new movie's coming out. I drew Wonder Woman. Nothing too crazy.
Okay. Wow. So you were so focused on your drawing that you just got yourself sunburned, right?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty. Yeah.
She came back.
I'm bright red.
She came back toasty from her visit. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and introduce today's guest. The Nashville-based contemporary painter Kathryn Dettwiller is a master of encaustic painting. Her abstract works are known for their vibrant colors and three-dimensional textures. Summers Randolph, a former Nashville artist who now lives and works in New Mexico, creates sensuous stone sculptures. The artists are currently showcasing their work in an exhibition called Canvas and Stone. The exhibit is on display at Mott Haven through July 27th, 2025. Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph, welcome to Mott Haven.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, Kathryn, I want to just maybe start with you real quick. Your paintings are remarkable, both for their vivid colors and their bold textures. And I just was wondering, how did you first get involved in art? And more specifically, did you discover art or did art discover you?
Started in grammar school.
Okay.
And I seemed to have a knack for it. So I kept on and then really got into it in high school and then in college and just took off. I didn't have any real training until college.
Right. So and you went to Vanderbilt for
I went to Vanderbilt.
Okay.
Wasn't much training there at the time.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But I majored in art history and learned on the go.
Okay. Were you always interested in the abstract art, or what was your interest?
Yes. More, I gravitated towards the abstract, for sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, Summer, same question. How did you get into sculpting? What did you?
Same answer. I decided to be a sculptor when I was 15. Uh-huh. And I gravitated toward abstract because it's a lot more interesting for me to try to balance a set of curves than it is to copy something that already exists, to do figurative work. I tell folks that come through the studio, if you take a potato and put two holes up here and one hole down here, you got a head. After that, it's either good or bad. And I still have the ultimate respect for some of the figurative artists that are really expressive and working. I know Alan LaQuire just had a huge show at the Parthenon this week, and his work is certainly Nashville famous. I mean,
yes, absolutely.
He's the big dog of sculpture in Nashville.
Yeah,
and he has moved from total realism to generalize.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think he's experiencing a little more freedom now.
Yes.
I also majored in art history.
Well, and I was going to ask you guys that because that also intrigued me that you're both art historians and we're not like studio practitioners in school. No. What prompted you to go in that direction? It's very academic and less practice oriented.
I didn't have a choice. Princeton supports the study of that which they don't support.
Okay.
So once something exists, they can study it, but the creation of it is not something that university's interested in.
Okay.
If I had known at 18, I would have gone to Yale, and then I'd be a blue chipper right now.
There you go.
My answer is the same. Vanderbilt at the time I could only get 8 hours of credit towards graduation.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So art history was the way in to being in the arts and getting a degree.
Okay. Well, obviously something drove both of you into the creative mode. I had to read your statement, though, Kathryn, one of your artist statements, because it meant a lot to me. I make art to find out what I think, but haven't yet verbalized.
There's a lot of that.
And then you go on to say, I believe that the spaces between connections are more important than the connections themselves, for it is in those spaces that I learn who I am.
Yes. I wrote that.
Yeah.
Because
that's some statement poetry there.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about that, and it reminded me of a biography of Beethoven I had read not too long ago, by Maynard Salomon, who was basically talking about late Beethoven and how, what Beethoven ended up doing was actually telling us in sound what ecstasy feels like. Mm-hmm. And he didn't know words, but it was actually much more intense. And I guess if he could have put it in words, he would have been Goethe. But instead, that's what that art form does. And I think I kind of get that from both of what you're doing as well. I mean, I'm getting the emotions.
When you're an abstract painter or sculptor, you're trying to work through that which there aren't words for. We'd be poets, or we'd be writers, or we'd be something else. And music is the same way. It's abstract. Mm-hmm. So that's...
And yet it is more effective in expressing certain kinds of emotions,
yes,
which is why I guess, it is so intense and so immediate. We're speaking with the artist Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph, whose exhibit Canvas and Stone is on display at Monhaven through July 27th. We'll be back after this important message.
NOSI College of Art and Design reminds us that arts education is an essential part of a balanced student. It helps students develop creativity, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. NOSI is a college built around your imagination. Find them online at www.nosi.edu.
We're back with the artists Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph. Well, the two of you are in a group show. It's a wonderful show. It's called Canvas and Stone. It's on display here at Monhaven through July 27th. There's 65 works. Kathryn, you have paintings, and Summers, you have your amazing sculptures. This exhibit is kind of a reunion for you guys, though, isn't it? When did you first meet?
What was the date, Summers?
1990, I think.
Yeah.
Blue Sky Court.
Blue Sky Court.
That first show we had,
mm-hmm.
the Oasis.
Artists for Oasis.
The Oasis show.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. And that was Summers' baby.
And if you don't know, Kathryn has sponsored every art show for a number of decades. When we needed beer and wine, Get Distributing was right there to help. I mean, you helped a lot of art venues with that contribution.
Well, that's good. It was my husband's company that did that, not me personally.
Well, you had a little push.
Well, yeah, But that's nice of you to bring up and to say.
No, absolutely true.
And Summers, you were pioneering coffee culture here, right?
Yes.
Blue Sky Court. Tell us about that.
Yes.
When I moved here in 1990, there was not one place in Nashville that sold cappuccino.
Oh my gosh.
And I was moving from Santa Barbara, where cappuccino and, lattes and all that were just really taking hold.
So there is a big hole in your life, and so you had to fill that hole.
So I opened a coffee house. I bought an old burned out warehouse down on 4th Avenue and renovated it and got going.
And also ignited the artists working towards something greater than just showing work. We were showing for the benefit of Oasis Center.
Mm-hmm. I think that was a nice thing to do.
It was
to
wonderful.
ally
Didn't you
ourselves.
do that in Santa Barbara?
I told the group of the board on it was October, and I said, we're going to have this show in February, and I didn't have a floor built in Blue Sky Court, and they came down and said, I don't. And everybody on the board said no. And one lady said, I'm going to do this. And another lady said, well, then I'll do this and I'll do that. And pretty soon we had the show. Mm-hmm. We had it in February.
It was very successful, too.
And tell us a little bit more about that Oasis show.
Well, they ran it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I think it raised, $1 million over 10 years for the Oasis Center. And I had the kids painting furniture, and I had to argue with them about writing checks to the children they were taking care of. They didn't like that, but that was the promise to the kids, was you paint this furniture, we'll sell it at the show. Mm-hmm. And we did, and they did, and it all worked out.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of curious. You guys met in 1990, and I'm just wondering what was Nashville's art scene like back in the 1990s? We obviously didn't have a Frist Art Museum, but that was around the time that Nashville's sort of do-it-yourself, sort of independent artist groups, your Fugitive Art Center, your Untitled Artist Group. That's when those guys started popping up. What was it like back then?
It was very scattered, and then we did those shows, and some others just kind of spontaneously grew out of nothing. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't a scene. There was the previous to that, there was the Nashville Artists Guild, and way back.
That was Louise LaCour.
Yes, yeah. That was Louise.
Mm-hmm. Alan's mom.
Mm-hmm. And way back then, they brought some New York shows to Nashville. And when I got out of Vanderbilt, that was the place to be, was a member of the Nashville Artists Guild. Mm-hmm. And then Summers took over.
I didn't take over anything, but
you took over the juice in the artists here, I think.
Well, thank you. I did show. I put 50 shows up in 2 years. Every 2 weeks, I had a new show nailed into those falling down brick walls down there, and that was a lot of fun. Jim Sheridan had his first art show there.
Oh, did he?
He was doing hat show print, but he came down and he said, I've been making art and I want you to come see it. And I said, you've got a show. And he said, no. And I said, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You got a show. But it was it was kind of freewheeling. They would say, oh, you're not allowed to have breasts on the wall and sell beer. And I'd said, well, next. It's
an interesting combination, but
that's a law. Uh-huh. You're not allowed to show breasts and sell beer. Uh-huh. And the laws may have changed. Now they've got things driving through the downtown streets that are pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But
yes.
My point was that and I forgot my point while I was thinking about the downtown.
That's quite a distraction.
No. The beer, and I would tell the inspectors, I'd say, look, in a week, if I'm showing Johnny Cash's crayon drawings, would you like tickets to come to that show? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, well, this will be gone in 2 weeks. And they'd say, okay. And we just worked. We were pushing the edge, but leaving it alone. And then there was the Visual Artists Alliance of Nashville, and Alan's wife, Andre, was the head of the board there. N4Art was the Nashville, I can't come up with it, but it was the black version of Artists Alliance, and Carlton Wilkinson was the head of that. Mm-hmm. And then we had the Untitled group, which was really fun. We'd invade great big warehouse spaces and we'd clean them all up, and we did it with Barry Walker down at Marathon Village. Mm-hmm. And there were some real fun. The difference was between where I live now and where I was here is that here, because there wasn't a common language of visual art, if you were a visual artist, you glommed on to other visual artists. Oh, come to my studio. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's talk about art. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's do a show together. And in Santa Fe, the artists that are making a living are busy working.
Right.
And it's a job, and you're doing it every single day, and you don't have time to go, we're aware of each other, but there's not a lot of interaction.
Well, also, in Santa Fe, you're making sales.
Mm-hmm.
Here, there was little to no sales.
That's right. Well, Ron York did a great job with his gallery.
Yeah, he did.
And on 2nd Avenue, who's the woman that had the gallery on 2nd?
Saturn Zimmerman.
Yes.
Was down there.
Alice and Nancy.
Alice Zimmerman, Nancy. Yeah. And then there were just some scattered places.
The Crafts Place out on West End.
Yes, but that was Nancy Saturn's.
Nancy Saturn,
American
and then she
artist.
got the thing going with the show in the park.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, which was a step above, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Artists came from around the country to show her show.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was a time, too, in the 90s where Nashville was beginning to evolve from being, I guess, a local sort of southern town, mid-sized southern town, to being more of what the New York Times referred to as the It City. And I can, and when you have all of these artists suddenly finding each other and they always want to work together. And that did distinguish it from other places, as you were kind of talking about Santa Fe. But I remember interviewing Peter Frampton a few years ago about moving to Nashville. He lives in Nashville for years. And he said that when he moved to Nashville, I think it was the late 1980s, early 90s, he said that everyone he knew in Los Angeles was saying, "Why are you moving to Nashville? Are you crazy?" And I asked him, "Well, what do they say now?" And he said, "Well, now they all live here in Nashville because everything sort of gravitated here." And he said that the big advantage for him in living in a place like Nashville is because there is kind of more of a tight-knit musician and artist community. So that if you're in a place like Los Angeles where everything is busy and spread out and expensive, or New York or London, musicians meet and say, we should really get together and do something. And he says, and then they never do. But he says, here in Nashville, if you say that to someone next week, they'll be on the phone with you and you're going to be in a studio.
Yeah.
So that is part of a culture here in Nashville that's a little bit different. And I think that I get the sense that that was definitely happening in the 1990s, and it has just become more of a permanent feature. And also, when you have lots of artists beginning to move here, you create an effect. I mean, it's almost a gravitational effect. You start attracting more and more artists because they know that's a place for artists. And I think that's where we are now. In fact,
I think in music, Nashville was known as the home of country music and Grand Ole Opry. And what became obvious maybe through the 90s was that Nashville had the best musicians anywhere.
Yeah, that's true.
And every kind of musician. We had jazz on Sunday afternoons, and sometimes I couldn't listen to it, but it was very contemporary, crispy, edgy music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're speaking with the artist Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph, whose exhibit Canvas and Stone is on display at Monhaven through July 27th. We'll be back after this important message.
Creativity involves breaking out of established patterns in order to look at things in a different way. Nosy College of Art and Design reminds us that creativity consists of rearranging what we know in order to find out what we do not know. To think creatively, we must be able to look freshly at what we normally take for granted. Nosy, a College of Art and Design. If people say you're different, welcome home. Find us online at www.nosy.edu.
We're back with the artists Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph. Well, Summers, what brought you here initially to Nashville in the 90s?
Family heritage. My great-greats were here. One of my great-great-grandfathers founded Watkins. I mean,
okay.
It's familial in Nashville. So when I was
So you must have spent time here
I was in Santa
youth,
Barbara,
right?
yeah, every summer. But I was in Santa Barbara, and when I found myself behind 9 people at my favorite stop sign shortcut, it was time to leave. There were too many people. So I ended up downtown on 4th Avenue in Nashville, and that was a move that was occasioned by a warehouse that was for rent and then for sale. And I'm a big fan of Nashville in the 90s. I mean, the artists in the 90s, Laney Gannon and Lane York and who else am I thinking? Name some more.
I don't know. Sherry Warner Hunter,
who's done all the intro sculptures to the freeways coming into Nashville.
Yeah. Well, Lane is still here as a zeitgeist, and he's the guy who likes to say, I like to blow things up. That's what he wants to do with his art.
I have a lot of Nashville artists on my wall in Santa Fe.
Uh-huh. Well, what prompted you to move to Santa Fe after your 7 years here?
Well, I kind of figured out that I could no longer represent my family the way they thought they deserved to be represented and tell the truth.
Okay.
So I had to move. I mean, I had dinner with my dad one night, and he said, "Son, don't you have anything positive to say?" And I said, I don't. I really need to leave. And it just not 7 years was enough. All the cells in my body had changed, and it was time to be somewhere else.
Okay.
And in moving here from Santa Barbara, I'd gone back and forth across the country, and I always stopped in Santa Fe.
Okay.
And I would fall in love for the weekend or take a hike that raised the hair on my arms, or, something wonderful always happened.
So there was a pull there.
Yeah, and when it was time to leave Nashville, it was time to go to Santa Fe.
Okay. And when you left, I believe I read somewhere that you actually put up some signs saying "Imagine Art Here."
Yeah,
and you got a Best in Nashville
there was no
award.
Public art. Yeah, I nailed those signs. I got my poker buddies to help me spray paint these signs, and we got in my van and drove around Nashville and stuck signs everywhere we thought they ought to be public art.
Imagine Art
And the Nashville scene gave me the award for
most quixotic departure.
Yeah, the most quixotic departure. That's right.
The Nashville scene was great there. I bet it was Jim Ridley who wrote that. He was one of the
invented an award for me.
Well, I didn't know that. You're extra famous.
I'm not sure the Nashville scene makes famous, but it probably does now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, actually, everybody read the scene. So, wow. Well, you have a New Mexico connection as well, don't you? Didn't you do a master class there? And tell me how Santa Fe and New Mexico always seems to affect artists. I mean,
it does.
It affects their sense of color and line.
Those
tell me about it.
Those colors in the paintings downstairs were definitely engineered. The light in Santa Fe is different. It is, and you can see forever. Mm-hmm. You can see storms on the horizon that are hundreds of miles away.
They're in a different state. You still see them, right?
And yes, well, when I came home from Santa Fe and we were unpacking the car, I broke out in a sweat. There's no humidity there. That was one thing that was very nice. Well, anyway, getting back to the Santa Fe Art Institute, there was a call out for artists who wanted to work with different artists at the Santa Fe Art Institute, which has become something else now. It's, but it was a place where you could study with Richard Diebenkorn, Nathan Oliveira, who that's who right? I studied with, and a number of other Beverly. I don't know. She's a sculptor.
Mm-hmm. Beverly Pepper.
That's who it was. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Beverly Pepper. They had lots of artists who would come in and do these master classes. I was there for a month, and it was transformative for me.
When are you coming back?
I'd like to come back soon. It's a magical place. People always said that, and when you're standing there, it's like the earth speaks to you. That sounds very...
Well, artists...
That's how everything in Santa Fe sounds. It's woo-woo. We call it woo-woo.
It is.
And all this stone downstairs, the calcites and the black Belgian, and each one of them has something to do with the chakra and what it does with your spirit and all that. If you read about them, that's a big part of all those little handable pieces.
Well, I have one personally.
Good.
So, it's it's something very different about Santa Fe.
Okay.
They call it the City Different. That's the title of the town. Santa Fe, the City Different.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
And I loved it. We bought a piece of property there, but did not build on it and finally sold it.
Well, let me ask you, Kathryn, a lot of the works, I want to talk about the works that are downstairs because they're so amazing. A lot of what you do is encaustic painting. And
Correct.
I'm wondering if you could just tell our listeners what that is and why you were attracted to it. It seems like it could be kind of an unforgiving medium.
It is unforgiving. If you heat it too much, it's like an ice cream scoop on a hot sidewalk.
Okay.
It is gone forever.
Okay. Well, tell us about that kind of painting and what inspires you to do it.
Well, like a lot of other things, I backed into it. I had collected some, well, I've come to call them sea wads from the beach in Destin. We had a Hurricane Opal came through in 1995. And these were like condensed tumbleweeds. And a friend and I sacked a lot of them, brought them home. I put them out to sort of air out because they were, the hurricane had churned them up from the bottom. They were, I'm sure they had sea creatures in them still. But they aired out anyway. And then I had a dream about using wax with them. And so I did. I started with paraffin and pastels. Pastels have very little binder in them. And I used that for a little while. And then there was a place, Cinopia, I may be mispronouncing it, that I could get a little bit of information. And by that, and the internet wasn't fully going where you could find things. And I eventually found R&F who makes pigments. They make encaustic and they make pigment sticks. And so there's something about that too that is very appealing to me. You smell it. It's hot. It's malleable. You can work with it. But you do have to work with it more or less in layers, and you have to fuse each layer with the layer below. So it's challenging.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about your inspiration for your paintings. There's one down there that's really, truly, I love. It's clearing the oneness, and it's almost a Rothko-like quality to it in some respects. And I'm just wondering, do you plan these out? Do you design them, or are you more improvisational?
They are improvisational.
Okay.
And they come from my experiences. That particular painting came from being in Destin. And the sameness of, this will probably make some people mad, but it's very plastic there. I always wanted to know where the real people live. But we had this house built it and had it for more than 10 years. So it suited me well enough, but everything is kind of the same there. Mm-hmm. Just like America is becoming so homogenized that there are big box stores everywhere, and they're the same big box stores, and everything is just looking different and the same at the same time.
Yeah, I kind of got that sense just driving down the road and looking. Everybody now has an SUV, and it doesn't really matter whether it's a Porsche or a Nissan. They look exactly the same. Uh-huh. And it just harkens me back to cars from the 50s or 60s, which were actually designed to look cool.
Yeah,
you know.
Sure.
So yeah, there is a kind of a sameness. We gotta maybe that's what you artists have to help us with, you know, to kind of get us a sense of what style really is.
We don't have to march in the line.
That's it. Yeah. Wow. Well, Summers, let me ask you. I mean, one of the things the first thing I notice when I go through all your different works, aside from just the amazing shapes and colors, they're all called Untitled. I'd love to ask you about that.
I need to tell you that is an absolute error. And I never title my work, and it's not untitled. It doesn't have a title until the person takes it home and titles it themselves.
Okay.
So untitled sounds like I don't have a title for my work.
So
and I have 1,000 names for each piece, but I'm not going to confine you, the viewer, I'm not going to confine you to what I saw. It's an abstract shape, and you might see something totally different. I have a piece in Santa Fe that is I think of it as the first seed, and it's got a big leaf coming off of it. And I was showing it to my friend Raleigh Grandbois, who's a native carver. He's Chippewa Indian. And I said, Raleigh, this is all about life and the beginning, and you don't know whether it's going to be a vine or an oak tree. And Raleigh grabbed the top of it and swung it over his shoulder and said, no, Summers, nice war club, because it had the shape of a Chippewa war club. And that's what he saw, and that was wonderful. I mean, I want these little pieces down here, the Musings, are all about holding them. I want people to pick them up and hold them.
Isn't that such a wonderful thing to have in an art museum, that you don't usually have anything quite that interactive?
Well, but sculpture's all about tactile. It's all about your fingers. It's all about what you feel.
Yeah.
And how the weight and the shape of the corner, all those are things that people don't normally interact because things are on a pedestal and they're don't touch. But I want people to hold them.
Mm. Well, you have a wonderful piece in our foyer, what Cheryl, our director, refers to as our wow wall and area there. You have a Utah yellow calcite sculpture, and I think we all stood around sort of thinking about, well, what does that remind us of? And we heard everything from angel wings to a lobster claw to kelp floating up from the bottom of the ocean.
Or a feather.
Or even like a character from Harry Potter. We even had one of those. So I thought, well, yeah, I kind of get that. There's just, you know, I was kind of thinking, you know, I wonder if Summers was just like the master kid in a car when you were riding with your parents, if you were looking at clouds and could always.
I used to watch the phone wires go up and down.
Yeah, I can imagine you had a sense of that.
And I was a carver even as a kid because I pictured I had a chainsaw and I was cutting everything as we drove along. Yeah, I remember being in the back of the station wagon.
Right.
And I also packed it. When I was 9 years old, I went in and told my mother, I said, listen, I can pack the car better than anybody in this family. And my dad said, you're 9 years old, you can't pack the car. And my mother said, let him. And so I went, I said, I want everybody to put what they need on the trip down over here and what they don't need till they get there over here. And we were driving, there was no interstate between Washington, D.C. and Monteagle or Beersheba, wherever we were going. And I took and packed it so that everybody had their own place and their own space because it was a spatial. I understood how things fit and where they would go.
Okay.
And it speaks right to sculpture.
Well, let me ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about your inspiration for your work. She improvises, and I'm wondering, can you do that with sculpture without having a disaster, or how does that work?
Well, when I started, we would go down to the quarries in Southern California and get blocks of alabaster, and they were all blasted out, so they had all different faces and shapes and textures. And I would start with a rock on the table and turn it and fix what I didn't like until I ended up with a shape that I did like. And then through the years, I developed a couple of shapes that I really like. One is just turns around and goes back to itself. The other goes through itself a couple of ways. And those shapes have been consistent in my process. But now I'm back to making these little things, and I sit with a grinder and just fix what I don't like until I end up with something that I do like.
Wow.
Well, your finishes are beautiful, too.
Thank you. Yeah,
They're exquisite.
I have an assistant named Sean Hall who will be a sculptor, and if you want to invest, buy a Sean Hall right now
Write him down.
$200 to $1,000. His pieces are reasonable, and he's the best finisher I have ever had. He sands my sculpture to 20,000 grit.
Wow.
And so you're touching the stone. You're not touching wax or a polish or anything else. You're touching the actual material. And the tigereye down there is 2 billion years in being formed. The marbles are 300 million. The alabaster is less than that. But it's really cool to be able to touch the stone.
Well, and I kind of get the sense that with your art, because you were saying that you don't title them, they're not untitled, that what's most important to you is really what they're made of and sort of how they feel and how they reflect light. That just seems to me...
Or how they hold light.
Or how they hold light. That seems to me what your interest is.
Well, it starts from a place of form. It starts from a marriage of curves and straight lines. You know, the form is probably first, and then the material is second. But you're right, lately I'm fascinated with translucence.
Okay. We're speaking with the artist Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph, whose exhibit Canvas and Stone is on display at Monhaven through July 27th. We'll be back after this important message.
Nosy College of Art and Design reminds us that arts education is an essential part of a balanced student. It helps students develop creativity, critical thinking skills, and problem solving. Nosy is a college built around your imagination. Find them online at www.nosy.edu.
We're back with the artists Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph. All right. Well, I guess maybe one final question for both of you. What would you like people to take away who come to see your show? What would you like them to take away? Aside from
paintings, right? That's right.
Well, actually,
that's what we want them to take away.
I've heard people talking already about what they want to buy, but what do you want them to take away from the art itself? What do you think?
You got a message? You got a political message in your art, Kathryn?
The message I have is if they'll just think about it as poetry, as something that you can't physically define, but it's very real.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How does it make you feel?
Yeah.
When you're picking up one of those little things down there, how does it make you feel? According to the woo-woo people we were talking about before, that calcite will literally change your whole body and your understanding and your, it's got woo-woo properties.
Right.
Now, that's a thought that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years about translucent stone. Whether or not it's true, who am I to say? But I really enjoy working with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's going to be a lot of the woo-woo effect when people come here to see the show, because these works complement each other wonderfully. Even though I know that wasn't the intent, somehow or other you guys really mesh very well, and your works mesh very well.
I think Summer's work is so gorgeous, and the shapes and some of the colors marry well with what I've done. I think the installation's gorgeous.
What I noticed was we kind of experiment in the same way.
In the same way.
I mean, you could be doing flat encaustic paintings, but you're not. And I could be doing traditional sculpture pinned and mounted on a base, but it's not. I mean, we're both pushing the edges of our respective materials.
Well, I hadn't really thought about that before. I just know a lot of people look at my work and go, oh, because Nashville's such a traditional town.
Well, I have said.
How did they do that again? Oh.
Well, what I love about your work, Kathryn, is that you really do need to be right in front of it to completely appreciate it, because it is not two-dimensional. I mean, your work really pops. out. And it has its textures and surfaces. And so I think it's splendid. And it sounds, I almost feel like the two of you are working somehow, at least on a subconscious level, in tandem. So it's a wonderful,
We may have.
maybe so. It's a wonderful show. I hope everyone gets a chance to come and see it. Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph, thank you for joining us here on Mac Talk.
Thank you for having us, John.
You've been listening to Mac Talk from Mont Haven Arts and Cultural Center. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and encourage our community through the transformative power of the arts. If you're interested in transforming your creative life, check out our website at monthavenarts.org. Our guests today were artists Kathryn Dettwiller and Summers Randolph. Their exhibit, Canvas and Stone, is on display at Mont Haven through July 27th. Our podcast music was written by Nashville composer Christina Spinay. I'm Kennedy Galpin. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.